and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Christie.
Thanks for coming. Well, I'm glad it's giving me a nice cool day down here in South Carolina. It's good. We left New Jersey, it was 88 degrees. And I said, heck man, that's not hot enough. Let's get to Columbia. So thank you all for having me. We appreciate it very much. It's good to be back in South Carolina. I've been coming here pretty consistently since 2010. I was elected governor of New Jersey back in 2009. 2010, I came down here and campaigned for Nikki Haley when she was running for governor the first time. Came back down here in 2012 to campaign for Mitt Romney when he was running for president. Came back here as the chairman of the Republican Governors Association in 2014 and campaigned again for Governor Haley. Came back here in 2016 and campaigned for Donald Trump when he was running for president in 2016. And then came back again in 2018 to campaign for my old friend Henry McMaster. And when I say old friend, it's not that I'm calling Henry old. He would be very offended by that. But we are longtime friends because when Henry was the Attorney General here in South Carolina, I was the United States Attorney in New Jersey, and we did a joint investigation together. And I remember when Henry called me because his office was investigating the same fraudster that my office was. And this fraudster was ripping off people in both South Carolina and New Jersey. And so we were both independently investigating it. And you all, knowing Governor McMaster so well, will know this story is true. He called, and my secretary came in and said, the Attorney General of South Carolina is on the phone. So I got on, and Henry got on the phone, and he introduced himself, and then he said, we gave him the name, they gave him the guy who we were investigating. He said, you familiar with it? I said, I am. And he said, got a question for you. He said, we gonna fight with each other, or are we gonna work together? He said, because if we work together, he said, we're gonna be able to put this boy away for a long time. And I said, let's work together, Henry, and we did. And we put him away in federal prison for a very long time with a lot of help from the Attorney General of South Carolina. So I've been down here a lot over the last now almost 10 years. And it's good to be back. When I was here in 15 and 16, I was one of the small field of 17 people running for President of the United States. And it's always interesting to see how the world changes. And I stopped over at the Palmetto Club a little while ago to see a group of folks from the county Republican organization. And one woman came up to me and asked me, she said, why are you in this race? I thought, that's a fair question. Why am I in this race? So I figured that's where I'd start tonight. If you asked me a year ago if I was going to be in this race, I probably would have told you no. We have my wife, Mary Patsy. Why don't you stand up, Mary Patsy, so everybody gets to see you. My wife's with me tonight. Yes, yes. And she, just so you know, if you come up to her later and you detect a certain toughness, that has nothing to do with New Jersey. That has to do with the fact that she is number 9 of 10 children. So she's been fighting with 6 older brothers since the day she was born and 2 older sisters. And I'm glad that she's traveling with me. We have 4 children between the ages of 20 and 30. And so when I ran for president the last time, a number of those children were still at home. And she couldn't travel with me nearly as much as she wanted to. But this time, there's really nothing left back there for her. So she's got to travel with me now. So I'm glad that she's with me. But when we started to look together as a couple, because you can't do this as one person. If you're married and you decide you want to run for president, it is a team effort. And if both members of the team are not with it, it's not impossible, but it's pretty hard. And as we started to look at this race, we became very, very concerned because both of us feel that Joe Biden has let this country down in just about every way you could think of. He ran for president in 2020 saying that he was going to bring the country together, that he was going to be a moderate leader for the country, and try to bring the two extremes of both parties into a place where they could work together. And a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people voted for him based on that idea. And he came into office and he ran as far to the left as he could, placating the far left of his own party, spending enormous amounts of money, and creating the worst inflation that we've had in this country because of his government spending since the 1970s. Shouldn't be surprised about that, though, by the way, because when you ask Joe Biden who his favorite president is of his lifetime, he says Jimmy Carter. That's not a joke, that's true. So we should have known when he said that this was not going to be a movie that ended well for us. Runaway inflation. He stripped away our energy independence and made us once again dependent upon Middle East energy and South American energy. He had that awful withdrawal from Afghanistan, which shamed our effort there and caused the loss of life of a number of young men and women in our military that did not deserve that. And he has led us to a place in the world where we are no longer feared and respected. You know, when you sit down for a meeting with a fellow head of state in the Oval Office of the White House, as he did just a day or two ago with the President of Israel, and you fall asleep in the middle of the meeting, I'm sorry, everybody. That means you're past your sell-by date. Okay? It means it's time to go. If you can't stay awake in your own office in the middle of the afternoon when you're talking to the President of Israel, it's probably time to go back to Wilmington. So, first motivation for getting into this race was we have to get rid of Joe Biden. And by the way, I want to be clear that I pray every night for Joe Biden's good health. Not only because he's our president, but because of who our vice president is. Because let me tell you, everybody, you think this is bad. Can't even imagine what that show would look like. That's reason number one. Reason number two is, I thought by this time, given everything that's happened, that the Republican Party would realize that races that look backwards are not winning races. Candidates who look backwards are not winning candidates, and they're not leaders. I will tell you this, I am tired of hearing about the 2020 election. And by the way, you know, I'm from New Jersey, if you want to talk about voter fraud, okay? We take a back seat only to Illinois. In fact, one of my predecessors, Governor Brendan Byrne, who has since just passed away, he used to say that he made his wife promise that when he died, that she would bury him in Jersey City, New Jersey, so that he could remain active in politics. So I'm not naive, everybody. I know that there's always a little bit of monkey business that goes on in every election, but not enough to change the result of an election in 6 states. So let's start there. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. Joe Biden's sleeping in the White House tonight, and it's our fault. Okay, it's our fault. And by us, I mean Republicans who allowed President Trump to do the things that he did. and empowered him. And we've been empowering him ever since he left the White House. And he's been taking advantage of us as a result. Now, the most egregious one I just heard today. Now, I remember, because I was in that 16 race, that one of the things Donald Trump said on that stage, among many things that he said in that stage, was, I'm a billionaire. I'm the richest guy on this stage. I don't need anybody else's money, and nobody can buy me or own me, unlike these other guys who are all out there asking for money. I'm going to be just for you. Okay. So then how do you explain this? His FEC reports have come out. 50 cents of every dollar that's being donated to his presidential campaign is going to pay his personal legal fees. 50 cents of every dollar. $17 million so far. Now, if you're a billionaire, I know how to count to a billion. 17 million, I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I'm not great at it, but 17 million is less than a billion. And if you get yourself in all this legal trouble, pay your own legal fees. Instead, he's taking $10, $25, $50 from middle-class Americans across this country who believe in him and want him to use that money to get reelected President of the United States, and he's taking it and he's putting it in his own pocket to pay his lawyers. It is disgraceful. It's beneath the office he asks for, and that alone should disqualify him from being our nominee in 2024. But that's not all. The whole damn family's on the grift. Okay? His daughter and her husband. Again, Jared Kushner, the son of a multi-billionaire from my home state. He gets sent to the Middle East to negotiate on behalf of our country. I guess the president sent him because he's such an expert on the Middle East, having been a real estate developer in New Jersey developing garden apartments. I'm sure that's why he sent him. I'll tell you why he sent him. We didn't see it till 6 months after. 6 months after Donald Trump leaves office, Jared Kushner gets on a plane and goes to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and he comes home with $2 billion of Saudi money to seed his investment fund, of which he will get a percentage of that money every year for the rest of his life, whether he makes a nickel for the Saudis or not. If anyone else in this country had first hired their daughter and son-in-law into the White House and then set them up to get $2 billion of money from the Saudis, there'd be outrage. But somehow with Donald Trump, he's skating past that. We can't let it, because let me tell you, we put him back there, the same thing's going to happen. The exact same thing's going to happen. Lastly, I run into people all the time who say, all right, I get it. He lies. He's selfish. But I like his policies. So I'm going to vote for him because I like his policies. All right. I like a lot of the policies he pursued too. And I want to remind all of you, I was the first person to endorse him when I dropped out of the race in 2016. The first governor in this country to endorse him. The first former candidate to endorse him. I chaired his transition to the White House. I chaired his opioid and drug abuse commission. This one will keep you up tonight. You especially. I want you to think about this now. I played Hillary Clinton in debate prep. Me. Hillary Clinton. Took me a while. All I had to, there's a number of things I had to learn, but I won't go into that. I played Joe Biden in debate prep in 2020 for Donald Trump. I had to take a few sedatives before I did, but I worked it out. My point to you is, I'm not coming down here in South Carolina as some never Trumper. I worked hard to get him elected in 2016. I worked hard every day to make him the best president he possibly could be for all of us and supported a lot of his policies. But he failed us. He failed us. He said he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare. And with a Republican Congress, he didn't get it done. You remember this one. He was going to build a big, beautiful wall across the entire border of Mexico, and Mexico was going to pay for it. Well, let me tell you what happened after 4 years. And you can go on the Department of Homeland Security website and see it for yourself. In 4 years, he built 52 miles of new wall. 52 miles. And by the way, we're still waiting for the first peso from Mexico to pay for that. Not a nickel from Mexico to pay for it. If you're trying to do the math in your head, I did this before, building the wall at that pace, he would have to be president for another 110 years to get the entire wall done. He failed us. He said, I will balance the budget in 4 years because I'm a businessman and I know how to balance budgets. And you know what he did? He added $6 trillion to the national debt in 4 years. Shocking. But it shouldn't be, because this is the guy who in my home state sent his 3 casinos bankrupt 3 times. Now let me ask you a question. Who can't make money with a casino? I mean, how damn stupid do you have to be to not be able to make money in a casino? They always win. How many of you have ever come out of casino saying like, man, 5th time in a row I've won? I never have. $6 trillion. One other quick story. When I was governor of New Jersey, I inherited an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget in 2010. And we balanced that budget without raising taxes. We cut 836 individual programs out to balance that budget. The reason I bring it up is because when that was going on, there was a lot of publicity about it. Democrats wanted me to raise taxes. I said no. And a friend of mine called me with an idea, Donald Trump. He called me from New York and he said, Chris, I see this big budget problem you have. I got an idea for you. I said, what's that? He goes, go bankrupt. I said, no, Donald. States are not allowed by law to go bankrupt. We can't go bankrupt. He goes, no, look, just do it. He said, it'll be 3 years before it gets through the courts and everybody will think you're a hero. We shouldn't be surprised. $6 trillion to the national debt. So on the issues that you care about, if you say, I know Donald Trump's not a good person, I know he lies, I know he's broken the law, I know he's grifting for himself and for his family, but I like his policies, I'd ask you a question. Why the hell would you hire him to implement those policies? He's proven he can't do it. Now, our country now is in a circumstance much like I think we were in the late 70s. For those of us who are old enough in this room to remember the late 70s, when Joe Biden's favorite president was president. Energy crisis, runaway inflation, people worried about jobs, the Soviets invading Afghanistan, boycotting the Olympics, hostages in Iran, and a president who said it was our fault, that we were under a malaise, and that it was our fault that America wasn't great. What did we do when confronted with that? In 1980, what we did was turn to a conservative governor from a blue state who knew how to solve problems. What we need in the government now is someone who knows how to run the government and solve those problems and has done it under the toughest circumstances. With all due respect to the other governors in this race who all had Republican legislatures, every minute of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year that I was governor, I had a Democratic legislature every day. I would have given my right arm for a week with the Republican legislature. They would have never slept, the things we would have been able to do. But I didn't. So what I had to learn was how to bring people together and get things done. And we didn't do a whole bunch of liberal things, everybody. We reformed the pension system for public employees and saved taxpayers $120 billion. We made public employees for the first time contribute to the cost of their health insurance, so the taxpayers didn't have to pay every nickel of it. We fired the entire city of Camden Police Department because they were the most dangerous city in America, and there were 400 of these cops who were failing every day. Their union wouldn't let us change, so we fired all of them. And we brought in new police, trained them in community policing and violence de-escalation. And what's happened in the 10 years since we fired that entire police force? The murder rate in Camden is down 75%. We need to have someone who's done law enforcement to get crime under control in our cities all across this country. What's happening in our cities is disgraceful, it's unacceptable, and if I'm President of the United States as a former U.S. attorney, violent criminals who carry guns will go to jail and they'll stay there. Ronald Reagan understood this. I remember sitting in my dorm room in 1980 in September at the University of Delaware, and I was going to get to vote for president for the first time in my life. I turned 18, and I got my absentee ballot. It wasn't rigged. It was actually a real ballot. I only got one of them, only filled out one of them. And I sat there, and I put the X in the box next to Ronald Reagan because he was the person who told me, I know how to run this, I know how to fix this, and I'm going to make your life full of hope and aspirations fulfilled. And I trusted him, and I voted for him, and it's the greatest vote for president I've ever made in my life because he kept his word to us. We need to do the same thing again. We need to take a chance on somebody who knows how to do this. So that's why I'm in this race. And I'll say one last thing to you about all of my colleagues who are in this race as well. I have to tell you, I just got asked, I was being interviewed on CNN before I came in here, and they asked me about your senator from this state. And did I think he was a formidable candidate? And I said, yeah, I like Tim Scott. I think he's a good man. And I think he tries his very best every day for the people of this state and for the country. And I've known him now for 10 years, and I like him a great deal personally. I just think I'm better qualified having been a governor for 8 years than he is having been in the legislature. And someday he and I may have to have that argument. But I don't have anything bad to say about almost any of my other colleagues in this race in terms of the kind of people they are. But here's my problem with them and why I got in. They won't tell you the truth about Donald Trump. They won't do it. They're afraid of him. And they say they're afraid of his voters. Let me tell you something, everybody. No politician in this country owns any voters. Our birthright is that we get to listen and speak and reason and decide. And he doesn't own any voter in this state or Iowa or New Hampshire or Nevada or any other states that are come after it. So they shouldn't be afraid of anything. You deserve two things as voters in this country. You deserve the truth, first and foremost. And the truth is not negotiable. We've gotten to a point in our country where everybody thinks that, like, the truth is their truth. So, if you hear something on one station you don't like, you just turn it to a station you do like. And then you'll hear the truth you want to hear. Truth's not negotiable, everybody. Our mother and father taught us that. I tried a couple of times to negotiate the truth with my parents. As you might imagine, it did not go well. I had a Sicilian mother. Let me tell you, it never went well. My mother's advice to me is guiding me in this race. I lost her 19 years ago. She never got to see me be governor. She never got to see me run for president. But something in the back of her mind must have been telling her what kind of man she would have to raise to have a chance to do that. She used to say to me, Christopher, remember this. Be yourself. Because then tomorrow, you don't have to try to remember who you pretended to be yesterday. And it's great advice. And all these folks who are running this race should get real with you. They know everything I just said. And you know the worst part? They whisper it to me. You're doing great. Go get them. Let them have it. You're the guy from New Jersey. You can do it. Somebody asked me, I was being interviewed at the New York Post the other day, and they asked me, why are you best equipped to take on Donald Trump? I said, 2 reasons. I've known him for 22 years. I said, second reason is, guys from New Jersey have been dealing with obnoxious guys from New York our entire lives. And we know how to deal with them. I'll end with this, then take your questions. Our country is at a moment where we have to decide whether we're going to be big or small. We're so small right now. Think about the small things we're arguing about. Small things. I got asked on CNN today, I didn't know about this till I got here late today, that Governor DeSantis is now saying that he wants to bring a lawsuit on behalf of Florida pension holders against InBev beverages because of the decisions that Bud Light made on their advertising, and maybe it affected the value of the stock. Let me tell you something. You all have rendered the verdict on Bud Light. You didn't like their advertising? You stopped buying their beer. That's what America is all about. You don't need the government in there making these decisions for you about what you like or what you don't like, what you'll buy or what you won't buy, what you'll support or you won't support. The power of the American people is the power of your wallet. You don't like what Target's doing, you don't go there. You don't want what Bud Light's selling, you don't buy it. You go down and you buy Coors Light or you buy Modelo or you buy whatever the heck you want. There's another beer there, like lots of them. But see, Governor DeSantis thinks that that's an issue that gets everybody riled up, and it's small compared to the big issues we have. But if he can just ride that horse as hard as he possibly can, maybe he'll get you so angry that you'll say, yeah, I'll vote for the angry guy. No, not that angry guy, the other angry guy. I mean, hell, man, I'm not angry about anything. I'm not angry. I'm determined. I don't want to fight for myself. I want to fight for you. Because if you win, I win. By doing big things. In 1776, if you had taken a poll in this country, the poll would have been in favor of the crown. Nobody wanted to fight Great Britain. It was the biggest army in the world. They thought those guys at Philly were crazy. Adams, Jefferson, Washington. Nuts. They didn't poll it. They said, I know what's right, and we need our own country to be truly free. Thank God they did, because here we are, and we wouldn't be otherwise. In 1861, Abraham Lincoln had hard decisions to make. He could have let the South go. We've been two small countries. Instead, he decided to go big and said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And we sacrificed a lot of blood and treasure and sadness. But what happened after that war? Our country was bigger and stronger and better. And in 1941, Franklin Roosevelt stood up and said, I am not going to let Hitler and Mussolini and Hirohito have authoritarianism across the entire world, and they're coming for us next. And we sacrificed, men and women sacrificed incredibly, both here at home and overseas, to fight that war, and we won it. And what happened at the end of it? America was bigger, stronger, freer, and richer than we had ever been. And in 1981, that California governor said, the Soviet Union is an evil empire. and I am going to relegate them to the dustbin of history. 8 years later, the Berlin Wall fell. And 10 years later, the Soviet Union was gone. We had to sacrifice a lot to do that. A lot more government money got spent, and lives got risked. But where did we come at the end of it? America was the only superpower, freer, stronger, richer than we had ever been before. We're at the same moment now, and the adversary on the other side is the Chinese, and we know it. We got to decide. Do we want to win again? Do we want to go big? Or do we want to continue to fight about these small issues? I'm sorry, the small issues can be amusing, but they don't make a great country. I'm running for President of the United States because I want to do the big things. I want to do the big things again so that we can be stronger, freer, richer, and a leader all over the world. So for that lady who asked me over at the Palmetto Club, I gave her the short version of that. Why I'm in this race, that's why I'm in this race. And I'm here in South Carolina because you know what? You have a unique position and you know it. We'll get through Iowa and New Hampshire, and then we're probably going to be coming down here. Brace yourselves. With the way these dates are working, we're all going to probably be here for a month bugging you poor people with our TV ads and our town hall meetings. But here's what I'd ask you to do. Go to all of them. Don't just come to mine. Go to all of them. Ask us all questions. Challenge us. This is not a TV show. This is not sitting across a fake conference table in a fake conference room and saying you're fired. This is the real deal. And we are at a moment of history. It is time to get the showman off the stage and try to get the people who know and care about this country back in charge of it. We don't need two people 160 years old combined on the ballot this November. You know, everybody says our country's so divided. Let me tell you one thing we're not divided on. I saw a poll the other day. 70% of Americans say they don't want it to be Trump and Biden. Hell, man, let's give them a parting gift and say, you united us. Get out. Both of you. Go to the beach. Do whatever you need to do. Thank you for your service. Time to go home. It's time for us to start doing the big things again. So I'm proud to be here. I love this country. I care deeply about it. And we can talk about a lot of other big things when you ask your questions of me. Anything is in bounds. I just remind you, I am from New Jersey. So you know what that means. It means you can ask me anything you want, and I will answer anything you ask me, and I will not sugarcoat it. But if you decide you want to have a little argument, we'll have it. And we'll have a good one. So Jordan's back there with the microphone. Raise your hand, and let's start with the first question right back here.
Hi, I'm Craig Howland, originally from Connecticut.
Well, 1 second. Let's get the microphone turned on. We got it on?
Is that on? Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah, I came down on a lark, but I'm glad I came because I'm exactly your age, and I remember well what you're talking about in the late 70s when we whooped somebody's tail in hockey.
Yes.
Boy, were people screaming in Vermont when I used to ski up there at the Killington. But I think we need somebody your age right now espousing the exact ideas you know, bringing forth. Quick story, my brother-in-law is an executive headhunter, retired now, mid-70s. He went from Fairfield, Connecticut down to West Palm to his other property. Interesting story, around 1990, circa that era. I'm an engineer doing NASA-level work at cable wave systems, microwave electronics, which is my field. And he said, I got invited to go down to New York City to Trump Plaza, and he was an executive headhunter, placing people in Exxon, major corporations. And he was down there, and he said, I was invited as a guest, and I had breakfast in the morning early. And he said that was basically just cereal. And when the meeting was over, and was going to screen candidates for Trump. He said, I got stuck with the bill, which is like $50 for a bowl of cereal. And he said he got a very strange, odd feeling about it, and what you're mentioning about the casinos failing. I'd been down there. I'd been in the Trade Center before they fell numerous times when it was new. I'd been to those casinos, and I knew exactly what you're talking about. So, that shows the character, and we've all seen what's been going on.
Yeah, look.
Too much radicalism, and we need moderation.
And look, we need someone who cares about the country as a whole, not just about themselves. And, the fact is, when you hear him talking, he's talking about he will be the retribution. Is that what we really want behind the desk in the Oval Office? I am your retribution? He'll be his own retribution, everybody. It won't be ours. And I want you to think about something. The presidency is too big a job for any man or woman to do by themselves. You got to have great people around you. He hired a lot of really good people the first time. Where are they now? All 4 of his chiefs of staff are openly opposed to him being reelected. Both of his secretaries of state openly opposed to him being reelected. Both of his secretaries of defense openly opposed to him being reelected. Both his attorneys general openly opposed to being reelected. Both his White House counsels, his lawyers, openly opposed to him being reelected. His Secretary of Transportation, his Secretary of Commerce, everybody who was close to him not only won't work for him again, they are out there saying they are opposed to him being elected. Who is going to work for this man? Forget about the C team. This is going to be the F team. And it will be showtime again, everybody, for him. And so, I have to tell you, and I said this the other day in response to your comment. They asked me about why I thought a billionaire was taking all this money to pay his own legal fees. And I had a weak moment on television. I actually absolutely told the unvarnished truth. I said, he's the cheapest SOB I've ever met in my life. And he is. He just is. And so that's okay. It's okay to be cheap if that's what you want. It's his money. He ain't cheap with ours, though. $6 trillion to the national debt. Not cheap with ours. Yes, ma'am. Who's got the microphone? Where are we?
Thank you. My name is Steve Hassel. I'm retired from the Air Force, 30 years active duty and reserve. Thank you. I never thought I'd see the day that our Capitol would be rioted. It really disgusted me. That's not why we serve. And so my question to you, Jack Smith, the special counsel, it looks like he's coming down pretty soon. Gerald Ford lost a second term. Maybe it was because he pardoned Nixon. I don't know, but I think the chess game is on, and I think Trump is losing. What do you think?
Well, look, because I was a prosecutor for 7 years of my life, I think I understand this better than most, and I'm happy to just quickly go through it. The New York case, I think, is a pile of garbage. I would have never brought that case. Look, the Manhattan DA's job is to make sure that he keeps the people of Manhattan safe and secure. I don't know how bringing a case against a 77-year-old guy for paying off a porn star to keep quiet about having sex with him 7 years ago makes Manhattan any safer. I don't think he needed to bring that case, especially when I go to Manhattan a couple of times a week. And man, you don't want to walk around there right now. You just don't. So I think that case shouldn't have been brought. Doesn't mean his conduct was good. It wasn't. You shouldn't be paying off a porn star to keep, porn star to keep quiet before an election so we don't find out that you had an affair with her. Not kind of character you necessarily want behind the desk in the Oval Office, but it's not a crime. On the documents case, look, you served, and you know that those military plans are secret for a reason. Because if our opponents get their hands on them in any way, It puts men like you and the women who serve as well at risk. Put aside all the other stuff he did, he was putting our servicemen and women at risk by having those documents laying around. What was he doing with them anyway? He was still pretending to be president, everybody. He kept those documents to pretend to be president. And for 18 months, and I love the people who say he should never had his house raided, it was horrible, terrible. Well, guess why his house was raided? Because for 18 months, they asked him voluntarily to give the stuff back. By letter, by phone call, to his lawyers, finally with a grand jury subpoena. Guess what? He would not be facing the charges he's facing today if he had done what any one of us would have done. Give the damn papers back. What are you doing with them? You're not the president anymore. Why do you need the secret war plan against Iran? No one's calling to ask your opinion. Joe Biden's not calling to say, hey, Donald, what do you think about the Iran thing? Not happening. He did it to himself, and worse. He lied and obstructed the government from getting that stuff back. He's in trouble on that case, and that case is now set for May 20th of 2024. If you're a Republican in this room who is committed to wanting to defeat Joe Biden because you think he's not the right president, why in God's name would we nominate somebody who is going to be on federal criminal trial 5.5 months before Election Day? It is insanity. He did it to himself. And about January 6th, I don't know what the charges are going to look like. And I'm a careful prosecutor. I don't comment on these things. You know, remember when the last one was getting ready to come out? Remember they announced it on Friday, but they didn't release the indictment till Monday. So all weekend, you had talking heads all over TV giving their opinions, and they kept asking me, and I'm like, I have no opinion. I haven't read the document yet. How about I find out what they're charging him with before I say whether he's guilty, innocent, or whether the charges are good? So I'm a stickler for that stuff. So I don't know what's going to happen. But in Atlanta, they have one of the biggest RICO statutes, broadest RICO statutes of any state in the country. And today, it was reported that they intend to charge him under the racketeering statute in Georgia. And what that means is that he set up a corrupt organization to try to commit a crime. That's coming too. Like, what's left? What's left? Look, I prosecuted cases for 7 years in New Jersey, and I'm proud of what we did. We did 130 political corruption cases against Republicans and Democrats without a defeat. 130-0. We put 10% of the New Jersey State Legislature in jail. 10%. Which you can imagine made it incredibly comfortable when I then got elected governor and went down with the 90% we missed. But I know what I'm talking about in this stuff, and we need to move on. We need to move on. And we need to move on to a president who understands what law enforcement is all about. And I end the answer with this. He said that it was okay to suspend the Constitution if you think the election was stolen from you. And when he was asked about that by Bret Baier, he stood behind it. Now, I want to remind you what the oath of office is for President of the United States. One of the things you swear to do with your hand on a Bible is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Not suspend, defend. Anybody, in my opinion, who says that it's okay to suspend the Constitution is disqualified from being President of the United States. He is disqualified. I pointed this guy. Let me go to him first, sure, and then I'll come right back to you.
I'm from New York, and I thank you for having us. Couple of questions. I disagree with a lot of what you say on Donald Trump, but I respect what you did in New Jersey, and I want to know if me and my family can take a picture with you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to take a picture right now. How about this? All right. Come on. Jordan will take the picture. Come on. What's your name, brother?
Nicholas.
Nicholas, nice to meet you. Here. Here we go. You're in the family too. What's your name? Nala, nice to meet you. All right. Thank you, my man. Excellent. Thank you, sir. Nice to meet you, man.
Hey, Governor Christie, Patrick with AARP here in South Carolina.
Right.
So I've probably asked you this question before. 1.2 million people in South Carolina depend on the Social Security check, probably a lot of folks in this room. What would a Christie presidency do to make that solution solvent for future generations?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because 11 years from right now, 11 years, Social Security will be bankrupt. And under the law, that means an automatic 25% reduction in benefits immediately for everybody who's receiving Social Security. Now, for some of you in this room, maybe taking Social Security now, some of you, like me, are close, and by 11 years will clearly be taking Social Security. A 25% reduction in Social Security for men and women who are relying upon it to pay their rent, to buy their food, to help support themselves, is unsustainable. The most disgusting moment in Joe Biden's presidency, in my view, was his State of the Union speech, when he stood up and said, can we all agree we're not going to do anything to Social Security? And both parties stood up and cheered. Well, no one, except for me, afterwards on ABC, explained to people what that meant. Doing nothing means a 25% reduction in every person's benefits. It can't happen. So everything's got to be on the table. And it means, should we have means testing? Does Warren Buffett need Social Security? Does Mark Zuckerberg? Does Elon Musk? Do people who have gathered enormous wealth, as much as I respect them for it, I don't want to take any of it, but once they have it, do you really need the Social Security check? Secondly, retirement age. Not for people in their 50s or 60s who are too close to retirement to change what they can do to prepare for retirement. But Mary Pat and I have an eldest son who's 30 years old. If I tell him now that the retirement age is going to be a few years higher than what it is right now, and he's got 35 years to prepare for it, if he doesn't, he's got bigger problems than whether he prepared for Social Security. We need to have that conversation. I'm not someone who will favor raising taxes, because I think our taxes are high enough, and I don't think we need to do it. I think we can make those other kinds of adjustments. But here's the thing about this race. I'm the only person in this race who will look you in the eye and say, I'm going to make changes that will save and strengthen the Social Security program. And you know the last president who did it? It was Ronald Reagan, who said, I will not let Social Security go down. It was ready to go bankrupt. And the things that Reagan did in the 80s have preserved this thing until 2034. For 50 years. I want to preserve it for another 50. And everybody in this race who says that they won't discuss the issue, or says we don't need to do anything, or I'll come up with something, beware. I'll tell you what Donald Trump said to me 8 years ago. I came out with a plan on Social Security 8 years ago. I was worried about it 8 years ago. And Trump came up to me on the debate stage one night during the commercials. And by the way, if the RNC really wanted to make money, what they do is sell pay-per-view for what's going on during the commercials. Because there's like 6-7 minute commercial break, and here are all of us standing on stage, right? What the hell do you do? You're not allowed to go talk to your advisors. You can go and say hello to your wife or husband or children, but you basically have to talk to each other. And by this time, everybody hated Trump except for me. Jeb wouldn't talk to him. Marco wouldn't talk to him. Ted wouldn't talk to him. They all hated him. And so the only person he had to talk to was me. So he came over to me and he goes, by the way, he goes, I saw that thing you put out on Social Security and Medicare. He goes, it's really, really smart. I said, oh, thank you, Donald. He goes, I'll never do it because it's not popular. But he said it's really smart. Is that the kind of president you want? Because if you reelect him, I guarantee you he will do nothing. He'll blame somebody else, and he'll be long out of Dodge by the time the 25% cut comes. So we've got to go back to the way Reagan dealt with this in the 80s, be smart about this, deal with it head on, so that nobody goes to their bank account and sees their direct deposit 25% less than it was the month before, because that will cost lives. And all this grandstanding by everybody else in this race, because no one else will talk about it. And I get reporters who come to me and say, what are you, stupid? What are you talking about Social Security for? Just ignore it. I want to do the big things. This is a big thing for the men and women in this country who have spent their whole lives paying into that fund every 2 weeks out of their paycheck, that we need to keep our faith with them. And that's exactly how I'll do it. Right here.
Governor Christie, you spoke to us about your service as governor while the legislature was heavily Democratic, and yet you made progress there. The country now is split almost in half on so many issues. How can you get beyond that? How can you help us get the country beyond it so we're not so polarized?
Good question, an important question. And I can only refer back to how I did it in New Jersey. Right after I got elected, the state Senate elected a new Senate president. His name was Steve Sweeney, and he was the president of the Iron Workers Union. As you might imagine, another shy and retiring type like me. And he was from the southern part of our state, and I said to the troopers, this is before I'm sworn in, I said, I want to go down to Steve Sweeney's office. He said, do you have an appointment? I said, no, just let's go. It's a 2-hour drive from my house to his office. And I just showed up in his office. And I walked in, and his secretary said, Governor-elect, I don't think the Senate president's expecting you. And I said, no, I was just in the neighborhood, and I decided to stop by. So she said, okay, I'll go get him. So poor Steve comes out embarrassed because he had just come from working out. And he was in sweatpants and a T-shirt and sneakers. He's like, Governor, I didn't expect you. And I said, no, I was just in the neighborhood. He goes, Bull, your neighborhood's 2 hours away. I said, all right, well, I came down to see you. Let's go in your conference room. And we sat down in the conference room. He goes, what's up? And I said to him, Steve, I got one question for you. I said, for the next 8 years, do we want to make headlines or do we want to put touchdowns in the end zone? And he said, 4 years. And I said, 8 years. I was right. I said, what do we want to do? I said, because if you want to put touchdowns in the end zone, I promise you 2 things. I will always listen to you. And when I put out my hand and I give you my word, whether it turns out to be a good political deal or a bad political deal for me, I will keep my word. And he looked at me and he said, I want to put touchdowns in the end zone. I said, good. I stood up, I shook his hand. And if anybody in this room, civilian or reporter, goes back and talks to Steve Sweeney today, he will tell them that I always kept my word to him. Politics is still a business of people. And we have dehumanized this thing by not talking to people, but tweeting at them. By not going to dinner with them, but yelling at them in front of big rooms of big people. We've dehumanized it. Some of the best political advice I ever got was from a friend of mine who said to me, he was going to see the New York Times, the editorial board of the New York Times as a Republican. I said, what are you doing? And he said to me, no, you don't understand, Chris. He said, it's harder to hate up close. It's harder to hate up close. So the first thing you do as President of the United States is to spend time with these people. Get to know them. Get to know what their families are like. You're not going to get all of them. Some of them are going to be, awful people, and they're just not going to want to meet with you. That's not anywhere near most of them. On both sides of the aisle. Listen to them. Find out what their priorities are. They got elected too. And then use the bully pulpit of the presidency to persuade, to get the public behind your point of view. And then go in there and negotiate the best possible deal you can to make progress. Ronald Reagan used to say, the guy who disagrees with me 20% of the time is not my 20% enemy. He's my 80% friend. We've forgotten that. And so it's not easy, and it's not guaranteed. But it worked for me for 8 years in one of the toughest states in this country, and certainly one of the toughest states for a Republican. You need to get people back to understanding that what you expect from us is to put touchdowns in the end zone, to accomplish something, not just go down there and blow hot air and score points on cable TV, and then come back 2 or 4 years later and say, wasn't I great? You saw my speeches. Yeah, no, we didn't do that, but that wasn't my fault. It was his fault. And just vote for me again. Everything will be fine. We can't do that anymore. The problems are too big. And more than that, the opportunities are too great to take a pass on spending the time. Believe me, there were many nights at 11 o'clock at night, Mary Pat and I would be in bed, and my phone would ring. And it would be the Senate president coming home from a dinner or some type of meeting. And she would say to me, really? 11 o'clock at night? This guy? Come on. And I'd say, I got to take the call. I took the call every time. Because I never, ever wanted him to be able to say that when he had something to say, I wasn't willing to listen. Now, this is also a guy who on the front page of our state's largest newspaper said one morning he wanted to punch me in the head. So it wasn't all sunshine and roses, and we didn't go out to dinner every night, but we got the people's work done. It's harder to hate up close. I've experienced this. The same way Reagan experienced it in California with a whole bunch of unruly Democrats. And he understood how to make things happen. You look at his relationship with Tip O'Neill. They disagreed on almost everything, but they found a way to cut taxes. They found a way to save Social Security. They found a way to fix the immigration system back in the 80s. They did all those things because after 6 o'clock, they'd go upstairs to the residence. They'd both have a couple of scotches, and they would sit there and talk to each other. We don't do that anymore. We are not going to accomplish anything as a country by continuing to scream at each other. Believe me, when I have to scream, I'll scream. When I need to be tough, you know I can be tough, and you've seen it. But that's not every day, and you got to have more than one club in the bag. In the golfing haven of South Carolina. You got to have more than one club in the bag, and I do. And Donald Trump doesn't. He takes his driver to the green. Back here.
Hi, I'm really a centrist, and I wanted to know whether you like it or not, Trump's influence on the Supreme Court is outsized. And we got some people on the Supreme Court who I don't feel really gave a proper sense of who the type of judge they were going to be. What is your vision for a Supreme Court that seems to be more aligned with the hopes and the wishes of the political body as a whole?
I'd respectfully disagree with you on some of that. Let me tell you why. It kind of makes me angry when after years in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we had liberal justices who were making up things from the Constitution out of whole cloth. And because we continue to have liberal justices on the court, those things stayed in place. And now all of a sudden you get conservatives on the court who are saying, no, abortion's not in the Constitution. No, it's not right to discriminate against anyone because of the color of their skin. And we can't have laws that do that. And they're undoing those things. Now all of a sudden it's unfair. I would argue it's not unfair, it's just different. And you may not agree with it. And that's what's great about a democracy. You know, you can support people who will do things differently. I will tell you this. I don't know Justice Gorsuch all that well, and I don't know whether I would have appointed him or not. But I know Amy Coney Barrett really well, and I definitely would have appointed her. And I know Brett Kavanaugh really well, and I would have definitely appointed him. And I'm not saying I wouldn't have appointed Gorsuch. I just don't know him well enough to know whether I would or wouldn't have. But what's really going on is what Barack Obama said to us a number of years ago. Elections have consequences. And so we've had more Republican presidents. And by the way, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, bless her soul, decided to take it right to the end. Took it right to the end. While Donald Trump was sitting in the White House. She could have left when Barack Obama was in the White House and been assured that someone like her would be appointed to her seat. She didn't. That was her choice, but it had consequences. Justice Kennedy, on the other hand, left before he died, and he's still alive. He left while Donald Trump was president. So Brett Kavanaugh got appointed into his seat. There are political consequences for all of this. What I think is important is that I hate the attack on the validity of the court because they've said what they've been saying in the minority for 50 years, that these things are wrong. Now they come and they're in the majority, so they say, that wrong stuff, we're changing it. In the very same way that when the liberals were in charge, they didn't like certain things and they reversed them. But I think if you look at the core of what the Supreme Court has stood for, they still, despite being 6 conservatives and 3 liberals now, they still have not given up on the rule of law. So when Donald Trump brings the election stuff to them, 9-0, no. Okay? If you look at almost all the decisions that the Supreme Court makes, the thing that happens the most is 9-0. The ones we read about are the 6-3s, the 5-4s. But these men and women are trying to do the very best they can. And I think we're running down another institution of our country that we need. An independent judiciary keeps an eye on everybody else in government. That's why we give them lifetime tenure. So I don't have to worry about getting reelected. I don't have to worry about whether you or me like them or not. I can guarantee you that Ruth Bader Ginsburg could have cared less whether I agreed with her or I didn't. The same way Antonin Scalia, before he died, could have cared less whether I agreed with him or disagreed with him. That's the kind of judiciary we need. And I'm concerned that as we run down the Supreme Court because we disagree with the decision, that we're going to diminish the value of that court to our democracy. It is the one thing that distinguishes us from every other free country in the world, let alone the dictatorships, is that independent judiciary. So we can disagree on some of that stuff, but my vision to finish the answer, I would look for the very best qualified people who are consistent with my philosophy of the role of federal courts in our governmental system. And you know what I also learned from picking judges as governor? They all forget who appoint them once they get in. I say they all believe they were virginal births. Politics? Nothing. I had nothing to do with politics. I don't even know what you're talking about. I had nothing to do with politics. Meanwhile, 10 minutes before they got sworn in, they're at my office begging to be appointed, right? Governor, whatever you need, I'll be your guy, right? Let me tell you, man, they all forget it. So, and Republicans have seen that with a number of justices that were appointed by Republican presidents. Harry Blackmun was appointed by Richard Nixon. He wrote Roe versus Wade. David Souter got appointed by George Bush 41. He was one of the most liberal justices, as it turned out, in the modern history of the court. So a lot of times you think you pick right, and you don't. And that's the beauty of the system, because once Souter got there, he didn't care what George Bush 41 thought. David Souter was going to do what David Souter thought was best. We got to preserve that. In the back here. I'll get you next.
Governor Christie, my name's Andrew Voiles, and I'm 20 years old. I grew up with a poster of Ronald Reagan in my bedroom. And if you're the Republican nominee, you'll have my vote for president. But in 2020, I voted for Joe Biden. And the reason for that is since Iowa in 2016, through the general election in 2016, and leading up to 2020, Donald Trump made very clear that he would not concede under any circumstances, and that he would not recognize an election he didn't win as legitimate. So while I respect that you are speaking out against him now after January 6th, if and when you are hopefully president, how can I go to bed at night trusting that you have a good grasp on the struggles and threats that the country faces? Thank you.
Good question. Look, let me clarify the record a little bit as you repeated it. I broke with Donald Trump on election night 2020 on live television at 2:30 in the morning when he came out and gave his speech where he said the election was stolen behind the seal of the president in the East Room of the White House, when he had no earthly idea whether the election was stolen or not. All the votes hadn't even been counted yet. To me, that was the moment when he proved beyond any doubt that he was beneath the office that he held. And maybe I should have known sooner, but I didn't. And I didn't want Joe Biden to be president, by the way. And I respect your vote for President Biden, but I didn't want Joe Biden to be president because I kind of anticipated what we'd see. And so I supported Donald Trump. But that night, I was sitting on set at ABC, and he's giving that speech, and I turned to George Stephanopoulos, and I said, come to me right when he's done. And he said, why? I go, I won't disappoint you. Just come to me. And I said exactly what I believed, which was that the man who is given the honor and the privilege of stewarding over our democracy can never put himself in front of that democracy. He did it. And why you should go to bed and feel comfortable about the fact that I understand that is that I'm standing right here right now and saying it. And believe me, it's not the easiest thing in the Republican Party to say right now. And you want the proof of that? No one else is saying it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so if I'm saying it now, if you honor me with your vote, and I'm fortunate enough to stand on the west front of the Capitol on January 20th of 2025, you can go to bed every night knowing that I understand what it means to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I will do it with every breath I have, every day that I would be honored to be President of the United States.
Thank you for being here, Governor.
Thank
and
you.
like the young man back there, my daughter's name is Reagan, named for Ronald Reagan. And all the conversation has been awesome about the big issues that really are presidential. But I'm going to ask you about something that's more small, because a lot of the other Republican candidates are leaning into this. So I am a school board member in the area, and we're hearing a lot about book bans and curriculum crackdowns and diversity and inclusion policies, and I would just like to know what your thoughts are on those issues.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for what you do, because school board is the most thankless elected position in America. In America. Thankless. So let me thank you for doing that thankless job. Look, I really believe in what you do. And I believe that the people who should be making decisions about what is taught in our schools are parents in consultation with their school boards, who, by the way, are parents who volunteer their time to be on the school board to oversee the people, the professionals who run our schools every day. And what I'm worried about in all this conversation is this idea that somehow the government can make these decisions for our kids better than their parents can. I think parents not only have a right to be involved, I think they have an obligation to be involved. And I think when government gets too big in this stuff, we let them off their obligation. Oh, someone else is taking care of it. Someone else is taking care of my kid. Governor DeSantis wants to tell all of us what books we can read, what things we can teach, what we can't teach, what I can permit my child to do, what I can't permit my child to do. Look, I don't know what kind of parent he is. He's got 3 beautiful little children. I assume he's a good dad, but it doesn't mean he and I will agree on everything about raising a child any more than you would agree with you or you or you. We're all going to raise our children differently, and we're all going to pray every night that we're not screwing it up. I mean, I say to Mary Pat all the time, I know I'm doing something that my kids are going to repeat on some psychiatrist's couch someday. I just don't know what it is. Because if I knew what it was, I'd stop, right? So we all have our ways, but I will tell you that I think the parents working with the school boards at the local level, not the President of the United States, not the governor of South Carolina, should be making those decisions. You now, and then you.
Governor Christie, good evening. I'm David Hoke and my wife Yvonne. We're from a little city of Loris near Myrtle Beach, which most of you have heard of. And we came here with the maybe a secondary desire to find out how our good friends in South Carolina would react to your anti-Trump speeches. And I have to tell you, we're grateful to hear what we've heard tonight. I was afraid we were going to get hit with tomatoes sitting up front. So I want to give you all a big hug. I think this is great. So I do have a question.
Good.
My question is, why is it so hard to talk about climate change in our country?
Well, look, I think there's two reasons it's hard to talk about climate change in our country. The first reason is that for most people, it's kind of an ephemeral concept, right? Like, it's hot today. Well, it's always hot in South Carolina. And people looking for I think what most people want is exact proof. Like, show it, I want to see it, feel it, touch it. And we know that climate change, which I believe there is climate change, and I believe that humans contribute to it. I think that's just simple deduction, right? We're doing a lot of stuff now that we didn't do 1,000 years ago. And that's got to change the earth. It just has to. Here's the bigger problem, though, is that the rest of the world isn't concerned about climate change. So, for instance, in the last decade, we have lowered our carbon output by 1 billion tons. We're making progress in this country. Everybody's contributing to it. The Chinese have increased their carbon output 5 billion tons. So, the American people look at that and say, all right, I'm going to understand something. We're going to make our life more expensive, more difficult, less efficient in many ways to try to save the earth, while the Chinese make it hotter because they refuse to join the party. And they say, well, you already had your industrial revolution, we're having ours. Guess what? They had theirs 50 years ago starting. This is part of the problem. I think that the core of the climate change problem in America is that we feel like we're being treated unfairly, and that Americans won't unilaterally disarm. They're going to say, okay, the Chinese are going to do all this stuff, they're going to get an advantage on us, we've got to compete with them. So part of what the next president's job is going to be, in fact, I think the biggest part of the next president's job is going to be the relationship with China. If we don't get that right, there are going to be ramifications for climate, there are going to be military ramifications, there are going to be technological ramifications, there are going to be educational ramifications that we can't conceive of as we sit here tonight. But we know it's going to happen if we don't engage them in a way that makes them understand. I have no problem with the Chinese competing with us and trying to beat us, just on a level playing field. Stop taking advantage of us. Stop stealing our intellectual property. Stop doing things, stealing American ideas to make your lives better. Buy them. You got plenty of money. Buy our ideas, the good ones. We'll sell them, most of them, right? And so I think those are the two big problems. One, that many people in the country can't see it, touch it, feel it, and it's not real to them until they can. And then the second piece is they feel like we're being taken advantage of. What I'd say to you on energy policy, which directly impacts climate, even though you didn't ask it, I'll say it. I'm for all of the above. I have no problem with wind. I have no problem with solar. In fact, in New Jersey, when I was governor, we were the second largest solar producing state in the country. Imagine that, New Jersey. All right? You wouldn't have guessed it. Arizona was first. You would have guessed that. We were second. Right? Guess what? In New Jersey, the most densely populated state in America, guess what type of energy produced 53% of our electricity? Nuclear. Nuclear. In the most densely populated state in America, we ran nuclear power safely and have run it safely for 55 years. And it is a clean energy as it applies to climate. Why aren't we doing more of that? Why are those of us who do remember the 70s still scared of 3 Mile Island? Man, that happened 50 years ago. And the technology now is so much better, we should be looking at nuclear. But until we are willing to do more nuclear, and until solar and wind is greater developed, we gotta do oil and gas. Because our lives are not going to be what we want our lives to be without it. So I think we do all of that stuff, and we continue to invest in trying to make our energies cleaner and cleaner. And we drop our fear of nuclear. It's not nuclear from 3 Mile Island. It's not nuclear from the China Syndrome, that old movie. It's not any of those things anymore. It's much safer, much cleaner, and much more effective than it ever has been. We got to look at all those things. And I don't mind leading on that stuff as long as I don't leave our industrial base and our ability to compete too far behind, that we can't catch up to the Chinese. So that's the way I would deal with climate. Yes.
Hey, I'm from the great state of New Jersey as well.
All
so
right,
I
where
get all of
from?
your jokes from Woodbridge.
all right.
And I've lived in Aiken for 22 years. I'm a physician here. The saddest part of my day is when I go home and I turn on the TV and I'm reminded that the #1 cause of death and illness in our children is that they go to school and they get shot by guns. My question is twofold. I struggle to understand intellectually why anyone who's not in the United States should be able to go and buy an AR and use it to kill people. The other is an issue of mental health, in that a lot of these people who are now finding it's a mental health issue, it's not always a gun control issue. So to me, that's a big problem, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. A few things on the gun issue. I'll start backwards on the mental health piece of it. Part of the mental health problem in this country is the stigma that all of us attach to it. Now, if someone in this room were diagnosed tomorrow with cancer, they would not for a minute hesitate to call their friends, their family, seek their support, their prayers, their recommendations on treatment, and all of those things. If someone was diagnosed with heart disease, they'd do the same thing. If someone was diagnosed with diabetes, they'd do the same thing. If someone had a mental health issue, and we could name all the different ones, but any of them, including addiction, which I believe is a mental health issue, we don't talk about it. You don't call your neighbors and go, hey, listen, my son is addicted to heroin. My son is a schizophrenic. I really need your help and your prayers. Do you have any suggestions on where I could get him treated? Have you ever had any experience with that? People recoil from it. And the reason that we can't help these folks is because we send them messages both directly and indirectly. It's not acceptable to ask. There's something wrong with you, and we don't want to be near it. My mother was an addict. She was addicted to nicotine. That was an acceptable thing to be addicted to. She started smoking when she was 16 years old in 1948. She had no idea that it was bad for her. In fact, there were commercials saying it was good for her. But by 1964, she knew that there was a problem. She tried to quit. She couldn't. She tried everything. When she died of lung cancer at 71 years old, when she was diagnosed with it, none of us hesitated for a minute to tell people about it. And no one came to us and said, well, Chris, your mother's been smoking cigarettes for 40 years. Well, what the hell did you expect? Of course she was going to get lung cancer. Didn't she read the papers? They all said, we're praying for her. They came to visit her. They supported her right up until the time she died. On mental health, that's where we have to get to. And the only way we get to it is if we all start talking about it. And it's got to start with the president. The president's got to start talking about it. Now, on the gun issue, we know that many of the people who are involved in these mass shootings turn out to be people with serious mental health issues. And what we also hear many of the times from the stories that get told after it's over, unfortunately, is, oh yeah, he had a problem. We knew he was disturbed. He stole the gun from his parents. He stole the gun from his friends. Most of the time, it's not even that they bought it themselves. And so the mental health piece of it is important to try to make those people understand that before they get to that point, there's a place where they can get help and feel better. The challenge in our country is we do have a Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment gives people the right to buy and bear arms. And it's not like we can treat it, in my opinion, as if it's an inferior amendment. It's like, then why can't we treat the First Amendment like an inferior amendment? Or the Fourth Amendment against illegal search and seizure, or the one that guarantees us a right to a trial by jury, or the presumption of innocence. They all need to be treated the same. And so that's why I think that, one, we have to treat mental health. Two, we got to enforce the laws we have before we start getting new ones. And we don't do a good job of that. We have people out there who are regularly using guns in the commission of crimes, and we have DAs across this country that are making it a revolving door and letting them out of jail. Also, by the way, most criminals don't buy a gun legally. Right? Right? And they don't follow the law because they're criminals. The last piece I'd say about this is that this is where the Hunter Biden thing, I think, is a real problem. Now, here he is, addicted to drugs. And he files a permit application to buy a firearm. And it asks you directly in there, do you have an addiction to drugs? And he lies. And he gets his permit, and he gets his gun, and there's all evidence that he mishandled the gun, left it laying around everywhere, left it loaded, all that stuff. And now the Justice Department is dismissing the gun charge against him. It carries a 10-year sentence, and they're dismissing it. And to me, it sends a horrible mixed signal to people. Like, Democrats are yelling they want more gun laws to make us safer, yet Democrats are saying dismiss this gun charge against Hunter Biden. And by the way, you know who sponsored the law to say that if you lie on a gun permit, you go to jail for 10 years? Senator Joe Biden. And so we need to get over the hypocrisy on this issue too, both sides, okay? There are reasonable things to do in controlling guns, and we're doing some of them now. The federal government passed some of the red flag laws and some of the other things that I think are important to interact with the mental health piece of it. But the Democrats can't continue to scream and yell that they want more gun laws, but then when one of theirs violates the gun law, well, we'll make an exception there. But for the grace of God, Hunter Biden could have killed himself or somebody else when he's smoking crack and playing with a gun. I want him to recover. I want him to have a second chance at life. I'm pro-life. I think every life is precious, not just the 9 months in the womb. And I think when Hunter Biden was an addicted, sad, depressed young man, that life is precious too. And we need to try to give him the tools he needs to lift himself up. So that's why the mental health stuff and all this comes so close together, because you see these problems intersecting all the time. Mental health, addiction, violence. Let's talk about it. And if we talk about it, we have a better chance of solving it. But if we just yell at each other about it and accuse each other of being in bad faith, you hate the Constitution. No, you're a guy who loves violence and loves everybody to have an automatic weapon who's going to kill people. Like, hell, man, that problem will never be resolved, ever. The real problem that needs to be resolved is the mental health issues and the addiction issues in our country. And if we get to giving people hope and make them understand that addiction and mental health are diseases just like those other ones, and by the way, there's some smart asses who have been to my town halls and go, yeah, well, they choose to try drugs. It was their own actions. I would suggest to you, like my mother, that human actions can contribute to every one of those diseases. Heart disease, diabetes, cancer. And so we don't punish people for that. You know, we don't go the guy who has a heart attack, we don't go chasing him into the steakhouse and ask him why he's ordering the the rare ribeye, right? I mean, so we got to end the hypocrisy on it and have a national conversation about it. If we do, I think we can make steps towards solving it. But as long as we have a Second Amendment, which I support, we can't just be saying, okay, let's grab all the guns and then everything will be okay. Because by the way, we already have 350 million guns in circulation. 330 million people, 350 million guns. And so even if we stop selling guns tomorrow, we got 350 million out there. And the bad people, they're not waiting to fill out the permit. They're just going and getting it. Yep, right over there. Nope, it's you.
Thank you. Hi, Governor Christie. Appreciate your giving us time today. I came down from North Carolina. I appreciate you allowing the North Carolinians to join this event as well.
I didn't allow you to come here. I'm looking for South Carolina voters, but all right, I'll answer your question.
Too late. I'm really thrilled to hear us talking so much about Reagan today. I grew up during the Reagan era. I believe strongly that it was the Reagan doctrine and peace through strength that led us to overcome and ultimately led to the end of the Soviet Union. I believe also, and I remember President Reagan said, there is no security, no safety in the appeasement of evil. And I think those words are as important today as they were during the Cold War. And I believe we're seeing evidence of that today in what Russia is doing to their neighbors and the atrocities that they're committing today in Ukraine. And so my question is, how do we keep our conservative national security principles, our values, at the fore, the peace through strength, our refusal to appease totalitarianism? How do we keep those alive amongst the populist noise that's out there? Keep them alive in our platform, and especially during this election cycle?
By, again, telling people the truth, right? I mean, look, as I said off the top, the war in Ukraine is a proxy war between the United States and China. That's what it is. The Chinese went to Russia before the war, and President Xi stood with Vladimir Putin and said, there is no limit to the friendship between China and Russia. No limit. And today he's proving it by funding that war for Putin. Putin doesn't have the economy to fund this war. All he's got is oil that most of the world isn't buying anymore from him because of his atrocities. But China is, and they're supplying that to them. So, in this race, I heard, all this garbage that was being spewed in Iowa last Friday. I don't know if any of you watched it. The Tucker Carlson interviews or insult-views of every presidential candidate that went there. It was dumb enough to go there and subject themselves to Tucker Carlson. Look, how small does he think America is? He said, oh, our cities are crumbling, yet you're spending money in Ukraine. We can do both. We've done both in the past, and all we need is leadership and strength to do it again. That's what we need. And right now, the Ukrainians have made it very clear to us, they don't want us anywhere near their war. They don't want American men and women on the ground in Ukraine, nor would I send American men or women on the ground in Ukraine. But what they want is the hardware to have a fair chance to beat the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians, which is who they're fighting, right? And I heard Governor DeSantis say that this was a territorial dispute. Let me tell you, everybody, what a territorial dispute is. Territorial dispute is if you go home and you have your property surveyed, and the surveyor comes back and says, oh, bad news, your fence is 8 inches on your neighbor's property. That is a territorial dispute. Rolling tanks and artillery into a free country, mercilessly killing their people and taking their land by force, Governor DeSantis, is not a territorial dispute. It is a war by an authoritarian dictator. America has always stood against that, and if I'm president, we always will.
Governor Governor Christie, I must admit I'm also from North Carolina.
Oh, jeez. I'm leaving. What the hell are you people doing here? I'll come to North Carolina in March, okay?
Well, I met somebody here from South Carolina.
All right, well, all right. You're half good then.
She's registered.
Good. Thank you.
All right, I just want to say, first of all, it's an honor to be here with you. I have been a supporter of you since that 60 Minutes interview you did in 2008, 2010. It was just so honest. You were talking about the deficit, and I just really appreciate that. You've always been a person that has taken on tough issues, and I believe whether it's this election, sometime when you cross those pearly gates, you are going to be rewarded for sitting here and telling the truth about Donald Trump.
Than that. I hope it's earlier than that. Yeah. But I'll take it. If it comes then, if that's what I got to take, I'll take it.
No, I think, in 2016, I think my moment is just a despicable comment by Donald Trump when he stood up on stage and said John McCain was not a hero. I cannot imagine Donald Trump in a North Vietnamese prison. Can anybody imagine him? It's unbelievable. But thank you. I sense your campaign is gaining momentum. This is a great turnout, and I just blessings of God on you and your movement forward.
Thank you. By the way, for anyone who's looking for a model for an absolutely great question, that was it. That is a fantastic question. Next question. Thank you, sir. How about in the back right there?
So then you're okay with North Carolina?
A hell of a lot better now than I was 3 minutes ago.
I'm from Greenwood, South Carolina.
All right.
Hope you're enjoying our self-service gas here.
You know what? All right, before you go. It is true that New Jersey is the only state left that does not allow self-serve gas. The only state. And we stand proudly. And let me tell you why. Jersey girls don't pump gas. That's exactly right. He's got a Ridgewood softball shirt on. He knows. Jersey girls don't pump gas. They just don't. I tell you, in the beginning, when I first was governor, my pollster came in to do our first kind of post-inaugural poll. And I said to him, hey, Adam, do me a favor. And I did it outside of my consultants who I knew would kill me. I said, throw in a question about self-serve gas. Like, see if, we've never had it. Maybe people are ready for it. He goes, you sure? Yeah, throw it in there. So the poll comes back, and my chief consultant, a guy named Mike Duhame, looks at me and says, where'd the self-serve gas question come from? We don't even want to talk about self-serve gas. I said, I put the question in, smart guy. What was the answer? He goes, oh, I can't wait to tell you, sir. He said, 80% of New Jerseyans oppose self-serve gas. I said, wow, 80%. That's pretty decisive. He goes, oh, no. 92% of New Jersey women oppose self-serve gas. So, yeah, we got self-serve gas. I don't mind serving myself when I'm down here in South Carolina, but I don't see my wife stepping foot out of the car, not once, to do the self-serve gas. She's now pampered. We took her from Pennsylvania to New Jersey 35 years ago, and she's completely pampered now. All right, go ahead with your real question.
Well, in all seriousness, I do really appreciate your standing up to Donald Trump and being the only Republican that's running for president to do so. You've really gained my respect. You've really earned my respect for that. One thing, as someone who majored in Spanish in college and one who has been to Cuba, I know how many hoops I had to jump through to legally travel there in 2006. And especially with the human rights violations that have been going on in China for years, it's always disturbed me that there's an embargo against Cuba, that there's travel restrictions, that I can't go with my family on vacation. It's always seemed kind of hypocritical. And I was just wondering what you would do as president to ease relations, improve relations with Cuba, and to hopefully at least lift the travel restrictions and maybe even the embargo during your term.
Well, here's my problem with the Cubans. And by the Cubans, I mean the Cuban government, not the Cuban people. They're now playing footsie with the Chinese. And they're talking about permitting the Chinese to have military bases in Cuba. That is not a way to get me to lift the embargo. That is not a way to get me to feel warmer and cozier towards the Cubans. My suggestion is pretty direct to the Cubans. Show you want to have, the Cuban government, show you want to have a relationship with the United States, I bet you'll have one. And I'm willing to listen. But I am not willing to listen as long as they're playing footsie with the Chinese. It's just not acceptable to me. And so I empathize with what you're saying, especially given your experience. But I am not going to send one signal to the Chinese that that would be permissible, that that would be acceptable to the United States, to have Chinese military forces 90 miles away from the coast of Florida. And so if they want a relationship with China more than they want a relationship with us, okay. They could have both. I'm not asking to put rockets in Cuba, and the Chinese are. The Chinese are our main problem and challenge over the next 50 years. Cuba has voluntarily, in my view, put themselves in that crosshair. And until they remove themselves from it and decide they want to have a relationship with us, my answer to your question respectfully would be no. I can take one more, and then I got to go. All right.
Hi.
I'll get you two.
My name's
I just
Mary
lie
Lou.
about that.
My name's Mary Lou, and my husband and I are from New Jersey as well. So, the fentanyl crisis. I have a 38-year-old son who lives in Wall Township, New Jersey. This past year, three of the kids that he grew up with have passed away from fentanyl. I have a friend here in South Carolina, in Charleston, who just lost a son 6 months ago to fentanyl. I find myself calling my children and saying, and these are children 30 and 40 years old, saying, if anybody offers you any pills, don't take them. And they're like, come on, Mom. But it's a concern of mine, and what can be done about the crisis? Because I know you're the drug guy. You know, for
You mean
fentanyl.
that in a good way.
I mean that in a great way. What can be done about the fentanyl crisis in this country and the young adults that are dying from it?
Sure. As I said earlier, I was chairman of Donald Trump's Commission on Opioids and the Drug Abuse Crisis, and it is a crisis. And it was a crisis before COVID. And we actually started to make a little bit of progress before COVID. The Chinese had slowed the sending of the precursor chemicals to make fentanyl, which they create, to Mexico. And we had increased treatment availability, and we started to see for the first time a decline in the overdose deaths in 2019. Then COVID came in March of 2020. And when it did, it obviously took over everything in our country. And what it did in addition to that was, in many states, close people in and increase the use of this drug. At the same time, we were having problems with China, and China started to once again ratchet up the sending of those precursor chemicals to Mexico, to the drug cartels, for them to create fentanyl. So I think a little historical context is important for when I tell you what I want to do. If I'm elected president, on the first day, I will sign an executive order that sends the National Guard to the border. And their specific task will be the interdiction of fentanyl, to apprehend the drug cartels who are coming across. Second, I will ask the director of the CIA to work with the Department of Defense to come up with a plan for us to take aggressive action against the drug cartels inside Mexico. And I will say to the president of Mexico, I'm going to give you 90 days to help to clean that up. And if you don't clean it up in 90 days, then I'm going to avail myself of the tools that I have available as the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief of the greatest intelligence agency and the greatest army in the world, and we're going to take care of it. But one way or the other, we need to take care of these criminals who are poisoning our children. Third, we need to recognize that last year, 110,000 Americans died of an overdose. It is now the single biggest killer of men 18 to 34. Drug overdose, the biggest killer of men in this country 18 to 34. So that's where my answer earlier on the gun issue applies to this as well. We need to make treatment broadly available, and especially treatment for addiction to opioids. And not just opioids like Percocet and the rest, but heroin, which is also an opiate, and fentanyl, which is an artificial opiate. We have treatments available. We have medication-assisted treatment that is on the market now and available that is much, much better than what we had back in the 60s and 70s, and much more effective to give people who can't get off of their addiction just through talk therapy, but need medication to help them get over that. We need to make that more broadly available. I'll give you an example of what we did in New Jersey when I was governor. We did criminal justice reform, and because of criminal justice reform, we were able to close 2 state prisons and still have crime decline. And the reason for that was that we stopped just locking up addicts, thinking that putting them in jail was going to cure their addiction. And then we reopened one of those jails, in fact, the jail that was on the campus of Fort Dix. And we made it a drug treatment prison so that people in the state prison system who had a documented addiction problem could be transferred in their last 6 months to a year of their sentence to the drug treatment prison and get active treatment, both medical treatment and psychological treatment, before they leave. And then we qualify them for Medicaid before they leave. And we give them their first prescription and tell them what drugstore accepts Medicaid to go and get their medication-assisted treatment as they leave. And what have we seen as a result in New Jersey? What we've seen in New Jersey is that we're seeing a decline in addiction among prisoners who are leaving jail. Well, because we treated them. We didn't just warehouse them. But the problem is so much bigger than that, that only takes care about that much. The prison population is that much compared to the overall population of a state like ours or the country. So we need to broaden this nationally. And we need to make people understand that we need to make these treatments available. Right now, you know, if you're a doctor, you need to go and get special training and a special license to prescribe medication-assisted treatment. But you don't need a special license or special treatment to prescribe an opioid. So explain that to me. The thing that gets us addicted, any doctor can give. The stuff that cures us, only a few doctors can give. Well, what the hell do you think is going to happen? The addiction outpaces the treatment by miles. So we need to say to folks, if you want to renew your DEA license to prescribe drugs as a doctor, take the training for medication-assisted treatment. That is part of the requirement for your medical license to prescribe. And then every doctor will have the ability to prescribe the antidote, not just the addictor. I think if we start to do those things, along with talking about these issues and making mental health treatment more available, we can start to deal with the addiction issue. So it's got to be about beginning to slow the supply by taking very aggressive actions at the border and with the Chinese who are sending these chemicals over here, because let's not mince words on that either. That's an act of war. They are sending chemicals to Mexico that they know will be used to create a drug that will kill American citizens. That's an act of war. And it needs to be said to President Xi just that way by a president of the United States who can stay awake during the meeting. One more question back here. No, this lady back here, she's been patiently waiting. Have at it.
Hi, I'm Lisa from Clinton, and originally Long Island.
All right.
Jersey mother.
There you go.
So I know about Jersey girl. Anyway, first, I can't speak with you without asking, do you have a pet? I'm a Humane Society manager.
I do not have a pet because our third child, Patrick, is allergic to everything.
Ah.
And so he has prevented our family from having a pet which his other 3 siblings remind him of regularly. I can
Okay.
promise you.
All right.
So no
I'll
pet.
let you off the hook on that.
Okay.
As an independent that leans left generally, I don't have a candidate. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. Why should you be my candidate? I know you're Mr. Let's make a deal. So that's what I've read anyway. that you'd rather a deal than no deal. You
Well,
know.
I'd rather an acceptable deal than no deal, yeah. I've walked away from some deals in my life, but okay. You want to know why me?
Yeah.
You've been here the whole time, right?
I have. I know
Like,
you're gonna tell the truth.
I swear I've been trying. I'm trying.
But as somebody that leans left,
Yeah.
why should somebody that leans left come
Okay.
right?
So if you just lean left, you're not running left.
No, I'm not running left.
Okay.
I vote either way.
Okay.
I vote for the
All right.
Bushes.
So that was
I
a serious
vote for
question.
Reagan. He was
If
my
you're
first.
leaning left, you can't be happy with what's happening in Washington right now. You can't be happy with Joe Biden, who promised you that he would be in the middle, and then all of a sudden he runs
That's
to the
why I'm
left.
here.
Right. I won't do that to you. And here's the thing. I stood here tonight and talked to you about drugs, guns, Social Security, talked to you about Donald Trump, talked to you about the war in Ukraine, China, and all those things, and gave you, I think, very direct answers. Some of you might like, some of you might not like, but I didn't mince any words with you. That's what you want from a president. You're never going to vote for a president who you're going to agree with on every single issue. In fact, I would argue to you that the only person that I agree with 100% of the time is me. All right? No. I do not agree with Mary Pat 100% of the time. We strive for a very respectable 70. If we're agreeing 70% of the time, we're doing really well. And we've lasted 37 years married, so we're doing okay. But what you want is someone who will tell you the truth, who knows how to get things done. And remember this as the last thing. No matter all the issues we talked about, I can guarantee you that in my first year as president, something will happen that we didn't talk about tonight. Something will happen that we couldn't have anticipated. Something will happen inside this country or outside this country that we will not have even thought about. Then what matters the most, because you won't know necessarily what I'm going to do, is the character of the person who's sitting behind that desk. That's what matters the most. And you may turn to your husband, your friends, your neighbors when I'm going to give that speech on that crisis, and they're going to say, well, hell, you were there with him in Colombia in 2023. What do you think he's going to do? And I hope what your answer is I don't know, but I trust him to make the right decision. And if that's your answer, then you voted for the right person. And so that's the kind of president that I want to be. And that's the kind of president I promise you I will be, because that's the kind of governor I was. You know, not everybody agreed with me in New Jersey. In fact, I got reelected in 2013 in a state that at that time had 750,000 more Democrats than Republicans. And I got 61% of the vote. I got 51% of the Hispanic vote. I got 25% of the African American vote. I ran against a female candidate, and I got 57% of the female vote. And I was a pro-life governor in a state that 70% believes in pro-choice. They voted for me not because they always agree with me, but because they trusted that I would do the big things and I would fight for them. And that's it. And I think that's why. And I swear I didn't set it up for her to give me my summation. But you did. I'm not going to say it a whole lot longer than that. In the end, everybody, don't make this race about the polls. Let's start with that. Okay? Polls are worth whatever they're worth the day they come out, and the day after they come out, they're worth less, and every day after that, they're worth less. But I'm also a realist. I know I'm an underdog in this race. I know I am. But let me also tell you something. 8 years ago, as I said before, at this time, everybody thought Jeb Bush was going to be the Republican nominee, or maybe Scott Walker. Scott Walker dropped out of the race in September before anybody could vote for him, and Jeb Bush didn't get one delegate. In 2007, on the Democratic side, at this point, Hillary Clinton was 34 points ahead of Barack Obama. We know how that ended. Here's what I think we should all be able to agree on. We suck at predicting this stuff. And we also know that polls are regularly wrong. There was not one poll that showed Donald Trump beating Hillary Clinton until election night, 2016. And you want to know why? In part, we all lie to them. We don't trust them. They don't call the right people. How many times do we have to see the polls being wrong for us to finally go like, okay, maybe they don't matter so much? Here's what I'd suggest you do. Go to all of these for all the candidates. See if they'll all stand up here for 2 hours and take your questions. See if they won't make you write them out beforehand so their staff can see which ones they like to answer. See if they'll actually call on anybody randomly and let you ask whatever you want to ask and actually answer your question rather than give their stump speech in response to your question. And then when you do all that, decide in your own mind, who do I want to be president? Who do I think is the best person to be president? And then work to make that person president. See, the difference in our country, more than any other country in the world, is you can do that. You can make the person president you want to be president. If you work hard enough to do it and gather others around you to do it, you can. We've had very unlikely presidents. Now, I love history. And I am accused at times by my staff of bringing up arcane, historic things to make a point that I spend too long talking about and that people generally get bored with. So I'm not going to do that tonight, except for this one thing. Don't worry about what the polls say. Don't worry about who the pundits say are going to win. Don't worry about who reporters say are going to win. Decide who you want to win. And if you want an example of it in history, I suggest to you the election of 1880. My wife is like, oh no, he's going to talk about James Garfield. Yes. I don't know if any of you really know James Garfield, but James Garfield went to the Republican convention in 1880 as a senator from Ohio, and he was there to place in nomination the name of Senator Sherman from Ohio to be president. That was his job. He did it. He went up there and he did it. And then they went through 58 ballots. It makes Kevin McCarthy look like he was picked as chairman overnight as speaker, right? 58 ballots. And then on the 59th ballot, someone voted for Garfield. And then more people and more people in that convention voted for Garfield. And when they were asking those people why, they said, because we listened to him, he's the best guy. Garfield stood up and tried to have his name withdrawn. He stood up in the convention and said, I don't know. I don't want it. And they voted for him anyway. And he beat Ulysses S. Grant for the nomination for president, and then was elected president in 1880. Because the people in that room, and you in South Carolina, are the people in that room in Chicago in 1880. We don't have those closed rooms anymore. The smoke-filled rooms where people get in there and the insiders pick who the guy for president is going to be. You do it. You're the people in that room. You get to decide Not who the pollsters say you should pick, but who you want. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm going to keep coming back. And that's why I'm going to work for every vote I can get here in South Carolina. Tonight is the beginning of that. We've just started. We're from New Jersey. We're like gum on the bottom of your shoe. We don't go away. I want to be your president. I thank you for your questions and for all of the attention you paid to me tonight. And I'll be back again. I thank you for coming. Take care. Thanks for your question. There you go, baby. Tough job. Tough job. Thanks for your question. Really important.